Gamers love adrenaline. That rush of endorphins that surges through the body when you make it to the final round in Fall Guys. Or when you're the imposter in Among Us is so intense, it is addicting. Which is why the horror genre is such a good fit for video games. It wasn't always possible to convey the feeling of horror back in dinosaur times, but starting in the early 80s, developers began to lay the foundation of what would become the most popular genres in gaming. While games like Super Ghouls and Ghosts have horror setting and are horrifying in their own way, they're usually categorized under their primary gameplay function. However, with the release of a little series called Resident Evil, there was finally a distinction between the genre differences that existed between horror titles. First, with the announcement of Resident Evil 1 came the announcement of a new genre, survival horror. This is one of the most popular genres in horror because the gameplay is intentionally stress-inducing to cause that release of adrenaline. But how can you make a survival horror game more intense? Make Resident Evil 4 and introduce action horror to the world. Now, Resident Evil isn't the only horror game out there. Another way to farm adrenaline is by using jump scares. This was popularized by Five Nights at Freddy's and the millions of clones that followed, cashing in on how easy it is to jump scare someone. A harder way to get a rise out of a player is to use psychological horror. Silent Hill is one of the best examples here, making the player question if what they're experiencing is real, going so far as to even break the fourth wall. One of my favorite examples is Doki Doki Literature Club. You should go watch my music video about it, it's really good. Psychological horror games may not have the moment-to-moment, heart-pounding, thrill-ride escapism that comes with titles like Resident Evil 7 or Dead Space. They do an incredible job at creating a looming sense that something is wrong. What that isn't always apparent to the player when first playing, but it is this uncertainty that creates the feeling of dread, triggering the fight or flight response. And even when it is apparent, that doesn't quite get rid of the feeling of terror that is invoked in the player. These days, horror can get insanely immersive. Resident Evil 7 is one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. The environment, sound design, limited resources, uncertainty, and moment-to-moment gameplay is engaging every single second. Knowing that it is only your skill at the game that will keep you from losing, and in most cases, that means death. This is what developers need to do to create good horror. And nowhere is it better represented than in Tetris the Grandmaster 3 Terror Instinct. While the environment isn't a typical horror environment, neither is Doki Doki. This is how they lure you in. The music is upbeat and catchy. You start up a game expecting to have a fun time. No matter how many lines you clear, the queue of Tetronymos at the top doesn't have an end in sight. If the limited inventory forcing you to make snap decisions multiple times per second, it's the best you've ever done. You can feel your heartbeat. The fear you feel when a piece comes down and lands just off from where you wanted it, and the frantic scramble to flip it into the correct position, the looming feeling of doom as the end draws nearer. Your only goal? Survive. And even that feels like an insurmountable task. The dread sets in as your board approaches the top, heart pounding now more than ever. And there it is. The feeling of hope as you see the line piece coming in, immediately replaced with terror, dread, and defeat as you realize you can't clear the way with what you have coming up. Check your inventory, also useless. The line piece spawns in, and you lose. But that isn't even what makes Terror Instinct scary, that's just Tetris. Tetris Terror Instinct takes everything here and turns it up to fuck. There's a game mode called Shirase, not sure how it's pronounced. That starts with the gravity up to 20 Gs, usually the highest speed on normal Tetris games, and increases from there. Then it starts spawning in garbage at the bottom of the board. Then it makes the game monochrome. Granted, there's still an end goal of 1,300 levels. Still, this shit is terrifying. Thanks for joining for Tetris Tuesdays. Tetris Grandmaster 3 Terror Instinct gets 4 spooky beers out of 6. Peace.